role today is to set the scene for what consumers are going to want under the NDIS, and perhaps give you a little bit of an insight as to why consumers might be demanding the things that they demand. My qualifications for being up here and talking with you today are twofold. The first is that I have worked as a doctor and professional in this area for over 25 years now. I started, my son is just turned 29, so it was because of him that I got involved in this area, and have worked in paediatric developmental disability clinics and developmental disability practice in other aspects, and over the last, since about 1992, have also worked in an adult centre for adults with developmental disabilities, or a centre that focuses on the needs of adults with developmental disabilities. In healthcare, we've got a problem. Children with disabilities are acknowledged as having complex health and social needs, and there are multidisciplinary services available to them, and there are specialist medical providers, paediatricians, developmental paediatricians, who focus on the particular needs of that group. When people become 18, there's a cliff that people fall off. There, all of a sudden, there's no specialist allied health or medical services to coordinate people's care, and their care comes to rest with the mainstream health system, with general practitioners who've had very little training, or if any, in disability, on allied health professionals in community health services, who once again have had very limited training in working with people, particularly with intellectual disabilities or cognitive impairments of any kind. And the system, the funding system, the funding sources are not set up to provide for people's health and function needs, either in mainstream or in disability services. Creates a real gap. This was recognised by the Department of Human Services, and they initiated the formation of a centre, actually two originally, one at Melbourne University and one at the University of, and one at Monash University, that were then amalgamated in 1998. And those centres and our current centre all focus on improving the health care and therefore the health outcomes of people with intellectual and associated developmental disabilities. And we engage in those activities through educational interventions. So we do a lot of teaching of allied health professionals and allied health professional students and medical students and doctors. We also do research in the area, and we also offer a small clinical service where they're not able to see everybody in the state, and neither would it be right to do so. People should be seeing their own local GPs, neurologists, orthopaedic surgeons, whoever they need. But because those professionals have had little experience in the area, we back them up so we can provide some support, both telephone support, or they can come to our clinics and we can go to their clinics. So there's various ways we act to support the mainstream system to do a better job for people with disabilities. And just as important as my professional qualifications are my personal qualifications. In 1985, my son Nick was born, and through that time, I didn't realise at that time, but that time was a very important time, a turning point in the service system around in the 1980s for people with disabilities. It was when integration in education first really began to be developed in a way that had funds to support people in mainstream settings. And my son went through mainstream school all the way through. It was a time when deinstitutionalisation was completing, or the last phases of that were acting out. So there was a great awareness, I suppose, and a focus on early intervention, a focus on how we can support families and people in the longer term. So we were very fortunate to be in that first wave when all those things were happening. And of course things have changed a lot since 1985, and we've been part of that change along the way. We've been on quite a journey together. This is my son when he was born, then my daughter when she was born. They went off to school together to the local mainstream school. My son became a teenager with his cousins, and here they are being men in black. I married for a second time, and my son developed a primary relationship, with his girlfriend. And they've all been milestones that we've shared together. Our family is very close and important to us all. And Nick's grown all over that time. The relationships between the family have grown and developed, and the relationships between Nick and his friends and his wider social network have developed as well. Over that time, his cousins have grown up, and here they are sitting on my mother's stairs, 15 years later. I've grown up, and so have Nick and Emma. And this relationship that Nick has had with his girlfriend has blossomed and flourished over the last 10 years. The sibling relationship in our family, it's been very important. Emma's been his best therapist, working on his fine and gross motor and language skills while having a really good time. She's encouraged him to take risks. She's provided him with a whole range of experience, introducing him to Chile here. That was challenging. Dodgem cars, and shared his many hospitalisations with me in supporting Nick in the healthcare system. And she's now his chauffeur as well. We've been through a lot together. Nick's had many different procedures relating to mostly his orthopaedic needs, his dental needs. He's been hospitalised many times for his seizures. And even the dentist is a bit of a challenge. So we've been through a lot together, Nick and I, and had a lot of experience, and Emma. Nick doesn't speak, but boy, he's got a lot to say, and he says it in many different ways, and he's a very creative communicator. He finds all sorts of ways of telling us things. A woman at his day activity support service, her name was Lorraine, and he wanted to tell me something about Lorraine, and I couldn't get it because he was sort of saying because he can't really articulate very much, and then he started doing this, and it was rain. And it's just he's a wonderful encourager of lateral thinking. You just have to be with and sit with and be with him and think, what could this mean in his context of his life? And he's helped us all as a family to become good listeners, I think. He uses sign, a bit of sign. Trouble with sign is, of course, only a few people understand it, and particularly he's got cerebral palsy, and so his signs are not easy for other people to understand. They're very idiosyncratic, so shrinks the field of people who can understand him even further. He uses a bit of vocalisation, very difficult to understand that too. And increasingly, and he uses visual cues. So for a long time we've used photographs and laminated sheets with photos and text so that he can share important activities that he's done with people that are important to him. But now all of that's been transplanted or transformed by the iPad. I'll come back to that a little bit later. When Nick was in his early 20s, things had been, challenging, and time was always of the essence up until then. But when he was in his early 20s, he clearly developed a very strong desire and need to be independent of us. A young man wanting to be independent, not wanting his mum to be cutting his nails and washing him and washing his hair and getting him dressed, and taking him to the toilet, and yet, of course, he needed support in all those areas. But he wanted independence, and like many teenagers, the way of expressing that was through angry outbursts. And he became very angry, and particularly angry towards me, and aggressive towards me. But and I understood why. He wanted me to back off. He wanted me to, he wanted to get on with his own life without his mum hanging over his shoulder. And I absolutely got that. But the trouble is he still needed that support. So that was a time when I put his name down for accommodation services. And it was a very difficult time for us. It was 3 years before he got offered a place, and in those 3 years he was very aggressive towards me, and I was injured many times. I crashed my car, I went on antidepressants, so it was a really hard time for me, for our family, for Emma, and of course most of all for Nick. My work suffered enormously. I did things like triple booked myself for appointments. I just was disorganised. I think so much of my headspace was with Nick. I just couldn't get it together. And 3 years later, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, he was offered a place. One place, take it or leave it, take it or go back on the waiting list. So yes, we had a choice, but boy, it didn't feel like one. It wasn't perfect. Nick was in his early 20s. The others in the house were in their 50s. The others in the house had previously lived at Kew, and so had a very different pattern of their life and different expectations of their life. And you could imagine for the staff it was very challenging, because they'd had 4 people who were very passive, really, who did who followed routines that had been the routines for many years. And into that very quiet, very controlled environment came Nick and I. And Nick was angry and still acting in many ways that were quite challenging, and so was I. There were many staff changes in the house. In the first year, I think we had 5 house supervisors with months between them where there was no real person in charge, people in acting positions. There was an enormous turnover of staff, so people didn't get to know Nick. And miscommunication happened over and over again. People would forget to pick Nick up from the day program. And that was partly my fault, because I had set in place a roster of Nick's time, when he was going to be at the house and when he was going to be with me and when he was going to be with my mum and when he was going to be with my ex-husband. And I thought that I'd done the right thing, but of course it was much too complex for accommodation services to manage, and so mistakes happened. And I wish somebody had sat down with me and said, listen, I understand what you're doing, what you're wanting to do, but there's some problems here with the way our staffing works, because I hadn't had a son in supported accommodation before. I wasn't really clear on how it all worked. And we can see some potential here for some problems to occur. Later on I understood that, and we simplified things enormously, and there haven't been those problems. But things also happened in that first year of the house where I would ring to see how Nick was, and on one occasion I rang and somebody I hadn't known answered the phone, and I said, "It's Jane, Nick's mum here. I want to know how Nick is." And I heard him yell out, "Oh, it's Nick's mum on the phone. She wants to know about Nick. Which one's Nick?" Which his epilepsy was pretty unstable at the time, and it didn't instill any confidence in me that he was being well cared for. Staff didn't get to know Nick. It takes time, as you would all know, to get to know somebody who doesn't use speech as a communication tool. It takes time to get to know them, and because people were changing, and I guess people were busy, and people had different expectations of themselves than the expectations I had, they didn't learn his communication systems. And of course that led to him being bored and frustrated, and his behaviour becoming an issue over and over again. And they didn't get to know me, and they didn't really appreciate the role that I wanted to play in his life, nor the value of including me in the partnership in caring for Nick. I really saw that there were three support pillars, I suppose, in Nick's life at that time. There was the family, there was the day service, and there was the accommodation service. And I just assumed that we would work together in partnership, but I didn't feel that. I felt, I guess I was hard to work with at that time because I was pretty stressed, but they certainly would have liked me to back off. And I was certainly told at one point that the best thing for Nick would be if I just left him in the house and didn't take him home for 3 months, so that he would get used to the routines. And of course that was just a red rag to a bull. I just was furious about that. It just didn't acknowledge the importance of Nick in my life or me in Nick's life. So we were in a situation where we couldn't build trusting relationships between the staff and the family, and the staff didn't get to know Nick or get to know us as a family. There were repeated communication breakdowns which further undermined trust and put Nick at risk, at physical risk, because his epilepsy wasn't being fully addressed. Our priorities weren't addressed, and our priorities were pretty basic, I thought. Health, life over death in terms of epilepsy. Communication, how basic is that? And choice and social connections. I felt that it was pretty basic, but it seemed to not be agreed upon. As a family, we became very unhappy and very stressed and very frightened and sad for Nick. And our behaviours expressed that distress. Nick was withdrawn and sad at some times, and at other times was irritable, non-communicative, non-compliant, destructive, assaultive, aggressive, dangerous. Staff became increasingly negative in the way and the words that they used about him. The result was that Nick and I became very challenging to work with. Nick and Angie's relationship, his girlfriend, weren't valued adequately by either Nick's house or Angie's house. She also lived in supported accommodation. Nick's, the service that was supporting Nick during the day, had a ball. First ball, it was eventually held over 3 years, and it was a tremendous success. But the first one, Nick was so excited about being able to invite Angie to the ball. And when I rang Angie's house and said Nick would like to invite Angie to the ball, the first thing was, the day program belongs to day program X, and we don't attend program X activities. And I thought, what? What do you mean you don't attend them? Angie had been attending it for 20 years during the day and had lived in that house for that time. But for some reason the staff didn't feel it was part of their responsibility to integrate Angie's life, to allow her to do something out of hours that revolved around the day support service. So there was an inflexibility there. And I said, Nick wants to invite Angie, and I'll pick her up, because there was the things about staffing. We don't have enough staff, we don't have a bus, we don't... Blah, blah. Okay, fine, that's fine. I'll pick her up. Nick and I would like to pick her up and take her to the ball, and we'll bring her home afterwards. What time would that be? I don't know, about midnight? Well, that's not going to work. She has to be home by 9:30 because that's when the evening staff go off. The other thing was Angie couldn't afford it. And I said, no, I'm not asking Angie to pay. Nick wants to invite her to the ball. We'll pay for her to come. in the end, I had to take it up the management structure and get operations managers involved, and use words like restrictive practice and formal complaint and things like that. And it was all sorted out. But it took an enormous amount of advocacy on my part that was entirely unnecessary, and they should have welcomed that opportunity. She doesn't have a lot of other people in her life, and I would have thought to embrace the opportunity to be part of Nick's family in this way would have been a great opportunity, but it was not seen that way. It was seen as problematic. And as you can see, here she is, absolutely loving being at the ball and dancing with Nick and dancing with Emma and dancing with Emma's partner and just having a fantastic time. And I was so glad that I persevered for both of them. I was like this at this point, right? I was protecting my cub. And I have to say my cub too was a bit like this at times. You know, we were hard work. I was the parent from hell. It was bad for me, it was bad for the staff, and of course it was worst of all for Nick and for Angie. We all felt a bit like this and like the angry lion. But just as we'd gone down this dreadful spiral into such a dark and negative place, so with the right intervention we could come up that spiral and come to a much better and healthier and lighter place. And what happened was we had somebody who actually spent some time at operation manager level saying, OK, we've got a real problem with the family and the staff here. We need to try and work this out. And spending time with me and hearing my side of the story and what had happened. Because for the staff, because they'd generally only worked there for a short time, they saw a snapshot of who we were and they assumed that that's who we'd always been. And it wasn't true for either of us. But there was an assumption there that was who we'd always been. So it was really important for somebody to take the time, and it took quite a bit of time because a lot of trust had gone by the wayside by then, to spend time with me to hear our story. I have to say over the first year I nearly pulled Nick out of the accommodation service 30 times, you know. It was very difficult for me. But my daughter Emma at that time said, please don't. If you do take him out, what is that going to mean for us? We're going to be back where we were before. And she said, Mama, it's really painful for me to see this with Nick too. It's really painful. But one of the things, she's 3 years younger than Nick, she said, one of the things that has always frightened me really is if something happens to you, how am I going to care for Nick? I can be his advocate, I can look out for him, I can take him out, but I can't live my own life if I'm providing his everyday personal care, you know, getting him up, getting him dressed, taking him to the toilet, taking him to the day program, you know, all of that stuff. I can't see how I can do that. And so for me, she said, him being in supported accommodation has lifted an enormous weight off my shoulders, and she would have been 19 then, and I can see how I can care for Nick if you're not around. And for both of us, that was a really important conversation that we had, and so I knew that I had to persevere through this. So this operations manager arrived on the scene, spent time with Nick, spent time with me, spent time hearing who Nick really was, not who he was in that snapshot of time. He was doing things like he wouldn't get on the bus to go home to the accommodation service. I wonder what that might have been saying. But there was all sorts of ways of, let's say, encouraging him to get on the bus, which led to him running up and down the road and grabbing sticks and trying to hit members of staff, trying to hit public. He hit cars, he tore the windscreen wiper off a taxi. It was, you know, he was hard work, and it sometimes took 2 hours to get him into the bus. Well, you know, it's not hard to work out what's going on. But it was assumed that that was Nick's behaviour of concern, so, you know, all sorts of behaviour programs were written around getting Nick on the bus with goals of, Nick will get on the bus, Nick will sit on the bus, Nick will, get off the bus, all this sort of thing that was just completely unnecessary if people listened to Nick and to me. Communication improved. What happened was our priorities for Nick, health and function, communication, relationships, a social life, choice, those things were acknowledged as important. Nick was happier, and therefore so was I. Our behaviours improved, both Nick and mine. And somebody said to me that parents tend to be as happy as their unhappiest child. So as Nick's mood improved, so did mine. And when we're feeling better ourselves, we're easier to get along with. We're all like that. And we became much more pleasant and enjoyable to work with, and now have a real sense of partnership. And when there's trust, there's also tolerance. Things don't always go right, but now in a spirit of partnership, I can bring things up and they can be responded to in a constructive way, not a defensive way, not a put down way, not a push away, reject way. And I can feel heard and positive changes can occur. We've used a lot of services over the years, many good and many bad. Nick went to early intervention, mainstream kinder, a reverse integrated kinder, which was kind of a special kinder where a few other kids got roped in as well. Mainstream school, special schools. In the last year of school, Nick's mainstream school actually was burnt down by another student, and so it was shifted temporarily to another campus which wasn't very accessible. So I decided that maybe one day a week he'd go to a special school just to make it a bit easier for the school staff. That was a disaster anyway. We've used local council respite, we've used interchange group, youth group respite. We've started with a day program that is better now in being a support system for Nick's day activities. Shared supported accommodation, I know a lot about that. And health, we've used a whole heap of multidisciplinary health professionals because Nick's health needs are complex and ever-changing. So general practitioner, of course, a paediatrician, neurologist, orthopaedic surgeon, dentist, orthodontist, speech pathologist, physio, OT, social work, podiatry, orthotics, lots of others. But there's no replacement. We had a good developmental paediatrician in his paediatric years who could work with me and monitor and coordinate his health care. There's nobody as an adult to do that. So that falls to me and to the staff of the house. Well, that's hard. It's okay for me, sort of, although first of all I'm Nick's mum, of course. I'm not his doctor and those things are quite separate. But it's very... the system is not well set up to coordinate people's health care. So the NDIS has arrived, and fantastic. It has filled me with a hope and an optimism and a sense of a brighter future than I've ever had before. I have a real sense of change, that there is a paradigm shift underway. I spent Monday and Tuesday of this week at the Geelong NDIS 1 Year On conference, and there's just this wonderful positive sense of partnership between people with disabilities, families and service providers and policymakers, that we're all making this journey together, and there are lots of potholes along the way, and there are lots of things that aren't going right, but gee, we are heading in the right direction, and together we can make it work. For me, it means a recognition. It means us becoming visible in the community. When Nick was little, we used to go to playgrounds, of course, like all parents of young kids do, and playgrounds in those days were not accessible. I had to hold Nick and climb up and down ladders and up and down slides, and try and give him that experience of being in that environment of a playground, but feeling profoundly that it wasn't for us, that somehow it wasn't made for us. We weren't kind of acknowledged as members in the community. And now with the NDIS, there's all this talk about disability. There's all this talk about people with disabilities being citizens, having rights, being community members, being included. That is so validating from a family's point of view, so valuing of Nick and the contribution that Nick makes. So that in itself is empowering. In terms of the service system, health, it's always been a little bit of a struggle to get health services to really understand the needs of people with intellectual disabilities and to address them in a holistic way. All of a sudden, health services are now saying, what does the NDIS mean for us? How is this going to change what we do? Let me tell you, it's a fantastic opportunity. We have a sense of agency. We're now voters and consumers, and we have a purchasing power. Fantastic. We don't just have to take whatever can be offered to us. That sense of choice that I had when Nick moved into accommodation, take it or leave it, that was the choice. There's a respect for our contribution, a valuing of our contribution, of our knowledge, and a sense of entitlement and dependency. The number of presents I gave everybody in the first years of Nick's life in adult services, because I wanted people to like him. I wanted people to, to do stuff for him. And I guess I still had that old-fashioned view of, gee, I need to be grateful for whatever we can get. And now I don't feel like that. Now I feel Nick has a right and we have a right as community members to the services that our community provides. So it's about real respect. It's about recognition and respect. It's about entitlement. It's about agency. It's about having a life and a leverage in order to get that life that is rich and fulfilling. It's about rights. It's about engagement. It's about support. It's about power and prospects for the future. It's about education and employment. And it's about contribution and trust in the future. Trust that there are lots of issues in the NDIS that are not sorted out yet, and for people with intellectual disabilities, there's a need for people to advocate for them throughout their life. That longitudinal advocacy is something that we haven't worked out how that's going to work yet, but there needs to be some way of doing that so that it doesn't rest just with family members. So when parents die, Nick's lucky that he's got Emma, but Emma actually has a life-threatening condition too, and so she may die. So I want to know who's in there in the service system who can hang in there with Nick for his lifetime. So what do we want for Nick from the NDIS? Well, it's pretty earth-shattering, actually. We want him to be happy and healthy and safe. We want him to be able to express himself and to be listened to. It's not enough just to speak. You want people to listen to you and care about what you're saying. We want him to, something happened there, to love and to be loved. To learn, to achieve and be proud, and to have a sense of independence, control and autonomy, and to have friends and fun. And for Nick, a real cornerstone of his quality of life is to have something to look forward to. It's often stage shows, so Phantom of the Opera, what else, Lion King, I can't recall other things. Mary Poppins we went to lots of stage shows, Oliver. He loves those. So to have something like that to look forward to every few months, is enough. It's not every weekend. We're talking about every, 4 months, maybe 3 times a year. To have something to look forward to is so important to him. It's important to us all, but for him it provides a focus of communication as well as a focus for his life and the excitement of anticipation. These are things that we want for all our children. So to be healthy and happy and safe, Nick at the moment has a personal trainer who goes to his day service and once a week. And the idea is that he has regular exercise there, some formal exercise for particular muscle groups that he needs to keep strong, and that the staff there learn a bit about those kinds of patterns of movement that are important to Nick, and that they can incorporate them into other activities that he does during the week. So he has his personal trainer. Health isn't important in its own right. Health is important as a foundation for our lives, and I want him to have optimal health and function so that he can live his life. He can run along the beach with his sister. You know, he can take his girlfriend out on a date and hold her hand and walk along with her. These are things that are important to Nick, and maintaining his health and function gives him a physical independence that he doesn't have when if he loses those abilities. He can walk, but only just, and he will probably lose that ability to walk in the next few years, but for as long as we can maintain it, that's important to him, and it gives him a physical independence, and it gives him, you know, a young bloke, lots of energy. He needs to run sometimes, and it's a good way of getting that energy used up. But to maintain his mobility as long as possible, we need to maintain his weight as low normal, because as you get heavier, it's harder to move around. As you get heavier, it's more wear and tear on your joints and muscles. And so to maintain Nick as long as possible as an independent walker, he needs to have his weight controlled. Healthy diet, healthy lifestyle, exercise, like all of us, but particularly important to Nick. The Golden Arches are not part of his plan. And yet the Golden Arches are still used far, far too often as a treat. And it drives me to distraction, and I don't think that I'm told about visits there as often as occurs, because I have reacted fairly strongly. His iPad has transformed his life. His iPad has given him an independence in communication that he's never had before, and an independence in entertainment that he's never had before. He can sit for hours with his iPad, and he can listen to music, and he can play games, and he can watch movie trailers, and he can pick it up, and he can come and tell somebody something that he wants to say. It's absolutely a core of his life. And when you're out and about, the volume on the iPad isn't enough to be talking in a cafe sort of situation. So he has a Bluetooth speaker that he hangs around his neck so that he can yell if he needs to. It's really great. It works at the day program too. Nobody listening to him, let's turn the volume up a bit. And here's Nick and Emma both on their electronic devices in the car. You know, she's on her phone, he's on his iPad. So it's very normalising. It's a social magnet. You know, people come from everywhere to see what he's doing on his iPad. And Nick, at the age of 29, after all the educational interventions over all these years, he now desperately wants to learn to read and write. He wants to learn to spell. And he wants to do that because he wants to type into YouTube Guardians of the Galaxy or whatever the current movie is, and he wants to watch the trailers. So the iPad allows us to allow him to explore that new way of learning, and so he's got a range of literacy apps on his iPad that he just plays obsessively, and he's really getting good at it. I want him to learn to be able to get the first 3 letters of the word, because if you can get the first 3 letters, it usually comes up on your list of options, and he can recognise things quite well. So we're working on that. He's got the first letter. He's pretty reliable with the first letter. He finds the next one difficult, but we're working on that, and he is doing it independently. So yes, it's enabled him to express himself and to be listened to and heard. It's independence in learning, it's a social magnet, and he rang me on FaceTime. We've used FaceTime a few times. He did it by accident and saw my face and hung up quickly. It was very funny. And I was at a conference in Sydney and I rang him on that, and he and his support worker sat and we had a conversation. It was fantastic. It was really great. My mum's got an iPad too, so Nick and my mum talk about the apps that they've got, and she looks at his and he looks at hers, and it's a lovely sharing. And it's independence in communication and the social magnet, as you can see. He's always the centre of attention for whatever he's doing with his iPad. I want him to be in the driver's seat of his life, even if it is a little scary at times, to have a sense of choice and control and autonomy in what he does and who he does it with and where he lives and who he lives with. And to love and to be loved. Nick has a lovely group of friends, of his very special friend Angie, who has been his partner for 10 years now. In the day service, they met when he started at the day service 10 years ago. Nick's taller than me and doesn't speak, as I've said. Angie is half his height and used to never stop speaking for a moment. So they were a great combination. I don't know what makes relationships work. Who does? But gee, theirs does. They've got a connection somehow that enables them to... They just love each other's company. And Nick's fairly protective of his personal space. You know, I would say, I say, can I kiss you goodnight? And about 25% of the time he says yes. Angie is allowed to hug him, pull his nose, blow raspberries on his face, spit at him, whatever works, all in the name of love. He also has another friend, Anthony, who's been his very special male friend for this 10 years, and he's got another group of friends who come and go in his life. But those two have been very constant. And we've taken them out on heaps of dates and outings together. And his family, of course. His family are very important to Nick. He comes home to us every weekend. Well, to me, 3 weekends out of 4, and then to his dad 1 weekend in 4. And that sense of partnership in his life has been great. And I would think within 2 weeks of him moving into the accommodation service, his behaviour towards me changed completely. He was then happy to have me do all his personal care stuff. He had his independence during the week, albeit fairly unhappy at that time, but whatever, he had independence during the week, and when he came home to me in weekends, he was a delight, and we could start enjoying ourselves and enjoying being together again and doing things together again, because he had been so bolshy before that. He wouldn't, anything I asked him to do, you know, get up, go to the toilet, have breakfast, get in the car, nothing, you know, he just wouldn't do anything I asked him to do. So there were many times when I couldn't go to work. There were many times when we couldn't attend family occasions unless they shifted the venue to us. Everybody came to us because he just wouldn't do anything I asked him to do. Now there's just no issue. And he's part of an extended and very close family. And I want Nick to have opportunities to learn and to achieve and to be proud of what he's achieved. He's part of an art circle, a group of artists who both have disabilities and don't have disabilities, who enjoy and love creating art. And he's been in several exhibitions, and he is so proud of what he's produced, he's created. And the coordinator of the art program is so valuing of the artists and has those exhibitions. The last one was in Docklands, beautiful gallery. And that's become a really important part of Nick's life and another identity that he now has, that of an artist. Literacy I've mentioned, he's just got a focus that he's never had before. He's trying so hard to learn to write and to spell in particular. And he loves having fun and having adventures. This is having his face painted at the show. Emma and her partner Sam are paramedics, so they thought that the face painting that they wanted was a critical injury. So Nick thought that was very funny. So they've both looked like they've been severely injured. He and I went for more traditional looks. This is a barber he loves going to that gives you a beer when you have your hair cut, and he loves that. So, you know, why can't he always have his hair cut at that barber? But unfortunately, it's not convenient, and this is a reason and that reason, so he doesn't very often get to go, but he loves it when he goes. And having something to look forward to, you know, Phantom of the Opera, going to Sovereign Hill. He went to King Kong, the musical, loved that. Christmas time, he has a routine with my husband that they go and get the Christmas tree. That's something that he really enjoys doing. Going to the show, Oliver, Halloween is something that's he loves. So, you know, just having a good life. I want him to have a good life. Want him to have a good life with us as a family, and I want him to have a good life without us as a family, his own separate life. What do we want? Well, we want to be listened to. We've loved and cared for Nick for 29 years, and we will do so for as long as we're alive. We needed help, but that didn't mean we didn't want to be part of Nick's life. It didn't mean Nick didn't want to be part of our life. We just needed to move on in terms of life stages. We want to be respected and valued for our knowledge of Nick. You know, we've been through a lot with him. We know a lot about him and how he copes and how to support him in various situations. We want to be partners in the services that are provided for Nick, and to share information and responsibility. We want to be able to trust that Nick will be cared for and about by others, and be gradually able to pull back from his life and give him increasing independence that he as a young adult needs, while still staying as connected as we can be and loving him. We want him to be the leader here. We want to be part of this support that helps him get where he wants to go, but we want him to be pointing the direction. We want to know that he'll be happy and healthy and safe without us, and that someone else will take the role of monitoring and advocating for Nick to ensure that the supports that he has maximise his opportunities while minimising risks. This is... you know, however much Nick wanted to climb that ladder, I hope that somebody would perhaps suggest that that wasn't the best alternative. Clearly nobody was there for this electrician to do the same. I want him to be proud, to be happy and proud of his life and with himself. This is him preparing to go out with Angie. He always likes to wear a tie. He always likes to do his hair. He likes the gel. He likes to choose his shirt. They are always outings, dates, that although they see each other during the day at day service, there's something completely different about having a date with your girlfriend. I mean, you know, it's hardly earth-shattering. And he likes to have the opportunities to prepare for that and to look great and feel that he looks great. Very proud. And you say, "You look great, Nick." And he says, "Yeah, I do." And that's it.